The battlefields of the American Civil War are silent now, but the earth itself remembers. Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh, Chickamauga, these names evoke not just history, but the lingering presence of thousands who died violently, trapped in the moments before their last breath. Walking across these fields today, the grass and monuments appear peaceful, yet there is an underlying weight, a subtle energy that presses against the chest, a whisper of voices long gone. Historians speak of tens of thousands of soldiers falling over 3 bloody days at Gettysburg. Yet those who venture there after dusk describe more than memory. They describe sensations that cannot be explained by science alone. Mist that twists unnaturally, shadows that move without wind, the faint glint of a uniform in the darkness. These experiences are reported across generations of rangers, historians, and visitors who dared to walk the fields alone. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought in July 1863, produced the highest casualties of any engagement in the Civil War. Men fell in forests, in open fields, and in temporary hospitals, their deaths surrounded by chaos and confusion. Soldiers buried in hastily dug graves, the wounded left screaming unattended, the air thick with smoke and blood. The pain and terror of these moments, some believe, etched themselves into the land, forming a residue of suffering that refuses to dissipate. Accounts from the 1930s onward reveal rangers and historians witnessing phenomena that defy natural explanation. The sound of boots marching where no one is present, the distant echoes of the gunfire and cries of soldiers in moments of fear and anguish. Shadowy figures in period uniforms appear at the edge of vision, vanishing when confronted, leaving behind only the sense of being watched. Visitors tell stories of more specific experiences, such as the group of Civil War reenactors who camped near Devil's Den in 1997. As darkness fell, one of the men felt a strong pressure on his shoulder, pressing him to the ground. Turning to face the source, he found nothing, though the fog rolled around him as if alive. Faint, metallic clinks echoed through the night, like soldiers marching silently, yet no one was present. The group fled the area, leaving cameras behind. When the film was later developed, streaks of light and faint humanoid shapes appeared, images that could not be accounted for by their absence during the original shooting. Such encounters illustrate that the presence on these battlefields is neither passive nor imaginary, but seemingly aware of the living who traverse the grounds. The Peach Orchard, the site of intense fighting, is frequently reported as one of the most active areas. Soldiers fell by the hundreds here, and many visitors today describe seeing uniformed figures charging silently across the orchard, shadows moving too quickly to follow. The air feels heavier here, the temperature dropping inexplicably as visitors approach. Witnesses report hearing orders being shouted in voices that echo unnaturally across the hills, while faint footsteps and distant cries follow them as they move through the area. Cameras often capture strange lights hovering above the field or fleeting shadows that disappear when looked at directly. These experiences suggest that the echoes of trauma and death from the Peach Orchard are preserved, resonating through the land long after the war ended. Little Round Top, another infamous site of bloodshed, conveys its own dark presence. Tourists and historians have reported ghostly figures on horseback appearing in the fog, shadowy soldiers moving independently of the terrain, and glimpses of men falling as though caught in endless combat. Park rangers maintain that the spirits of soldiers who fell there remain active, drawn to the site by the extreme violence of their deaths, replaying moments of fear, valor, and despair in endless loops. Individuals walking these grounds report sudden chills, a feeling of unseen eyes tracking their movements, and the occasional faint echo of musket fire in the otherwise silent night. At Antietam, the site of the war's bloodiest single-day visitors described similar experiences. The sudden feeling of being touched by invisible hands, phantom footsteps following them through the trees, and the sound of human cries indistinguishable from the wind. One woman photographing the battlefield experienced a phenomenon that has become characteristic of these haunted sites. A figure appeared in her camera frame, dressed in a remarkably well-preserved uniform. Standing in the middle of a field she had just crossed, staring at her lens. Moments later, the figure was gone, leaving her shaken and questioning the limits of what she had witnessed. The haunting extends beyond mere sightings. There are accounts of visitors hearing commands, cries, and musical signals, bugle calls and drum beats emanating from empty spaces, as if the dead are rehearsing the battle once more. Some rangers report the fog behaving unnaturally, curling and shifting with intent, as though alive, occasionally revealing humanoid shapes that dissolve when approached. In each instance, the battlefield itself seems to respond to those who enter, acknowledging their presence, interacting subtly with the living. This interaction is rarely violent, but often deeply unsettling, leaving a lingering sense that the dead are aware of being observed. These fields are not only haunted by those who fell violently in combat, they are also haunted by the aftermath of their deaths, the trauma, the terror, the hopelessness that followed soldiers to makeshift hospitals, the moments of agony endured as they awaited help that never arrived. Those who walk these fields feel it in the soil, the trees, the collective weight of suffering that has accumulated over generations. Photographers frequently capture orbs and streaks of light. EVP recordings contain faint, indecipherable murmurs. Some visitors wake from sleep after exploring these grounds with vivid dreams that replay moments of battle, cries for help, and the sensation of being watched, a psychic echo of the violence that occurred long ago. As the morning sun rises over the battlefield, the living may find the scene peaceful, the grass neat, and the monuments orderly. Yet beneath this surface lies a persistent memory, a reminder that these were places of extraordinary human suffering, where thousands fell at once. Even when the mist clears and shadows vanish, the history remains palpable, etched into the earth itself. The deeper one walks into America's Civil War battlefields, the clearer it becomes that the hauntings are not random. They follow patterns. They gather around places where death was not only violent, but prolonged, where soldiers waited, bleeding and terrified, unsure if they would live long enough to see the sun rise again. These were not just places of combat, but places of human collapse, where the mind broke before the body followed. And it is here, in these pockets of concentrated despair, that the past presses hardest against the present. After Gettysburg, Antietam stands as a reminder of how much suffering a single day can contain. On September 17, 1862, more than 23,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing before nightfall. The cornfield changed hands multiple times, becoming a slaughterhouse soaked in blood. Soldiers fell so quickly that bodies piled atop one another, forming barriers of flesh and uniforms. Those who survived the initial charges lay among the dead, listening to the moans of dying men for hours, sometimes days. Modern visitors describe the cornfield as unnaturally quiet, even on windy days. The silence feels forced, as if sound itself is being absorbed. People walking through report sudden dizziness, ringing ears, and the sensation that someone is standing just behind them, breathing slowly and unevenly. Park rangers at Antietam have reported hearing low voices during early morning patrols. voices that seem to whisper urgently as though issuing final instructions. Footsteps are often heard moving through tall grass where no one can be seen. One ranger described watching a figure emerge from the fog dressed in a Union uniform, rifle slung over his shoulder, only to fade into the mist after taking a single step forward. The ranger later admitted the figure looked confused, not aggressive, as if lost in time rather than haunting the land intentionally. These sightings suggest that what remains on these fields may not be spirits seeking attention, but fragments of moments replaying endlessly. Moving south, the battlefield of Shiloh tells a different but equally disturbing story. The fighting there was chaotic, brutal, and unexpected. Soldiers were attacked at dawn, many killed before they fully woke. The surrounding woods trapped sound, turning screams into echoes that bounced endlessly between trees. Today, those same woods are infamous for reports of phantom gunfire, sudden flashes of light, and the unmistakable smell of black powder lingering in the air without explanation. Visitors describe hearing running footsteps, branches snapping, and whispered pleas for help that stop abruptly when approached. The forest feels crowded, as if unseen observers are standing just out of sight. Several investigators have documented audio recordings at Shiloh, capturing rhythmic drum beats and distant bugle call sounds historically, used to signal troop movements. These recordings often occur during moments of complete stillness, with no nearby activity to explain them. In some cases, voices can be heard faintly repeating the same phrases, over and over, as though stuck in a final command loop. The repetition is what disturbs researchers most. It suggests not consciousness, but memory-painful moments, imprinted so deeply that they continue playing long after the people involved have turned to dust. Chickamauga, another battlefield drenched in blood, adds yet another layer to the haunting. Soldiers there were trapped in dense forests with poor visibility, leading to confusion and friendly fire. Many never realized where the enemy was until it was too late. Today, visitors report shadow figures darting between trees, disappearing when followed. Some experience sudden disorientation, losing track of direction even on marked trails. Compasses and GPS devices have reportedly malfunctioned in certain areas, though no official explanation has been confirmed. People often leave Chickamauga with intense headaches and a feeling of emotional exhaustion, as if the land itself drains energy from those who linger too long. What connects these battlefields is not just death, but unfinished emotion. Fear, regret, panic, and confusion linger like invisible fog. Soldiers who died suddenly never had time to understand what was happening to them. Others waited in agony, knowing death was coming, but unable to stop it. Paranormal researchers believe these emotional states may be what remains behind not intelligent spirits, but echoes of extreme psychological trauma embedded into the environment itself. This would explain why hauntings often feel repetitive, mechanical, and emotionally overwhelming rather than interactive. Many visitors report that the longer they stay on these fields, the stronger the sensations become. It begins subtly, a chill, a pressure in the chest, a sense of being watched. Over time, the feeling intensifies. Some report sudden emotional swings, unexplained sadness, or intrusive thoughts that feel foreign. A few have described momentary visions, brief flashes of soldiers falling, charging, or crying out images that vanish instantly, but leave a lasting impression. These experiences suggest that the battlefields do not merely display history, they project it. Medical tents and field hospitals appear to be among the most active areas. Soldiers brought there often died slowly, surrounded by others screaming in pain. Visitors report hearing moans, coughing, and whispered prayers near these sites. Some describe feeling pressure on their limbs, as though something is holding them down. Others report the smell of decay appearing suddenly and disappearing just as quickly. These experiences are often accompanied by intense emotional distress, causing some visitors to leave abruptly without fully understanding why. What becomes increasingly clear is that these battlefields do not behave like traditional haunted houses. There are no sudden jump scares, no theatrical apparitions. Instead, the presence is heavy, patient, and deeply unsettling. The land does not seek to frighten. It simply exists as it always has, marked by suffering and memory. Those who walk it are not chased or threatened. They are observed, immersed, and in some cases, subtly affected long after they leave. As historians continue to study these sites and paranormal investigators return year after year, the conclusion becomes harder to ignore. America's Civil War battlefields are not just historical locations. They are emotional landscapes shaped by trauma on a scale rarely seen before or since. The war may have ended on paper, but on these fields, its echoes continue to move, breathe, and linger, quietly reminding the living of what once happened here and what was never truly resolved. There is a moment when the battlefield stops feeling like land and begins to feel alive, a presence that shifts with the wind, watching every step you take. Among Gettysburg's rolling hills and Antietam's scarred fields, this presence seems to grow strongest where human suffering was most concentrated. The field hospitals, where soldiers came to die slowly, are more than haunted. They are saturated with the memory of agony. Imagine lying among the groans of men burning with fever, waiting for help that may never arrive, surrounded by others choking and bleeding in silence. Visitors describe the air here as dense, almost viscous, as though the echoes of pain cling to your lungs. Shadows twist unnaturally under the flicker of lanterns. Distant footsteps echo across empty tents. Whispers murmur urgent, incomprehensible words that vanish when you strain to listen. The terror is subtle, but cumulative, an invisible force pressing against your mind, testing your courage, and reminding you that these grounds do not merely hold history. They hold the dead. The mass graves amplify this presence. Soldiers buried hastily, sometimes stacked in trenches, created a concentration of human energy that modern science struggles to explain. Visitors standing above these graves report an immediate heaviness, a sudden dizziness, and an overwhelming sense of grief. The earth feels wrong cold in the middle of summer, warm during winter nights, and the wind seems to carry muffled cries. Some paranormal investigators have recorded faint, fragmented voices repeating orders, prayers, and even soldiers' names with eerie precision. One investigator recounted a moment when he swore a figure in a tattered uniform walked past him, shoulders hunched, eyes forward, carrying a rifle that seemed weightless. The figure vanished when approached, leaving only the imprint of fear in the air. These experiences create a crescendo of tension. The fields are not passive backdrops. They are active, ever-present witnesses to unimaginable trauma. Even forests surrounding these battlefields have absorbed the horror. At Shiloh, the trees seem to move with intent. Visitors report seeing shadowed figures dart between trunks and across paths where no one is walking. The snapping of branches often accompanies muffled footsteps, but when the witness turns, nothing exists. Fog seems to twist, forming vague shapes, soldiers running, crouching, or falling as though replaying scenes of battle in silent spectral loops. Some have described feeling the ground tremble slightly beneath them, in rhythm with invisible footsteps or the faint pounding of drums. The forest itself acts as both stage and participant, replaying history for those attuned enough to perceive it. Then there are the echoes of battle in open fields. At the cornfield Antietam, the dead seem most alive. Shadows in period uniforms appear to charge silently, vanish, and reappear moments later. Visitors report their hearts racing not out of fear of an immediate threat, but because the land itself insists on being acknowledged. One historian recounted hearing the sound of musket fire behind him, turning, and seeing smoke rising from the grass, but there was no fire, no gun, only the lingering smell of gunpowder. Cameras left on tripods record figures that disappear in direct light. Some witnesses describe a sensation as if the past is replaying in perfect loop, and the present is merely an audience to it. The climax of this phenomenon occurs when multiple forms appear simultaneously, soldiers frozen mid-charge, shadows of officers gesturing commands, cries echoing in different directions, creating a scene that feels alive, chaotic, and impossible to escape emotionally. Little Round Top, perhaps the most strategically important ridge of Gettysburg, is a focal point for these energy surges. Witnesses speak of seeing spectral soldiers climbing the hill, silhouetted against fog, moving in unison as though obeying orders from a ghostly commander. A visitor once described the air thickening with every step, an invisible pressure pinning him to the earth, while whispers in a mixture of English and unintelligible language filled his ears. He turned repeatedly, yet the figures maintained a fixed distance, following silently, never visible directly. The tension escalates in these moments, a psychological climax where the living feel the direct weight of the dead's experience, their fear, confusion, and relentless discipline. Even seemingly quiet battlefields like Fredericksburg have their moments of terror. Visitors report sudden gusts of wind carrying whispers, unexplained shadows moving independently of the sun, and glimpses of figures that vanish when approached. Some hear their names called in voices that sound like soldiers or civilians from another century. Electronic devices often fail here. Compasses spin erratically, cameras freeze mid-shot, and audio recorders pick up unintelligible murmurs. The haunting is cumulative. What begins as subtle unease becomes full awareness that the land itself holds and projects memory. The climax for many occurs when multiple sensory experiences combine: the smell of blood, faint figures in peripheral vision, inexplicable sounds, creating a confrontation with the past that overwhelms the senses. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of these battlefields is the psychological residue that follows visitors home. People report recurring dreams of the fields, visions of soldiers collapsing, and even waking with bruises or scratches they cannot explain. Some recount hearing footsteps in their homes, phantom gunfire, or the sensation of being watched days or weeks after leaving. These are not imagined. They are consistent, documented across decades, and involve independent witnesses who have no connection to one another. The climax of this effect occurs when multiple people in a group experience synchronized phenomena, hearing the same whispers, seeing the same figures, or feeling the same pressure simultaneously, suggesting that the land's energy is not only present, but capable of reaching across space and time. The field hospitals, mass graves, wooded areas, and ridges all contribute to a larger understanding. The Civil War did not end in 1865. The battle continues in energy, emotion, and memory. Those who walk these grounds feel it in their bones, sense it in the air, and sometimes see it with their own eyes. The haunting is not a traditional one, with overt malevolence or violence aimed at the living. Instead, it is a presence of accumulated suffering, replaying its own narrative, aware of those who witness it. The climax of any visit is rarely sudden. It is an overwhelming realization that the past is not past, that death, despair, and human emotion remain imprinted on the landscape, waiting silently for those who dare to observe. The sun dips behind the ridges, and suddenly the battlefield changes. Shadows stretch unnaturally long, even when the light doesn't justify it, and the air grows thick as if the land itself is inhaling. Visitors who wander these grounds alone often describe an unshakable feeling that someone or something is watching every move. At Antietam, one hiker recalled walking past the sunken road, now quiet and overgrown, when he heard the unmistakable sound of marching feet behind him. He turned, expecting a park ranger, a stray visitor, or even deer stepping through the grass, but the path was empty. The footsteps continued, perfectly synchronized, falling into the rhythm of a long-dead regiment. When he tried to retrace his steps, the sound accelerated, then slowed, then vanished altogether, leaving an echoing silence heavier than the footsteps themselves. The field hospitals continue to attract some of the most terrifying experiences. Modern visitors to Shiloh's medical sites report seeing figures hunched over makeshift beds, tending to unseen patients, only to disappear the instant anyone approaches. One couple described looking through the faintly lit ruins of a tent and noticing a Union soldier holding the limp body of a comrade, whispering desperately to him. When the couple blinked, the figure was gone, but the echo of the whispers lingered, audible for several minutes afterward. Many such accounts describe figures repeating the same motions endlessly, frozen in their final moments, as if caught in a loop of duty, panic, and despair that the living cannot break. Little Round Top has its own stories, particularly around the rocky outcrops where soldiers fell in volleys of fire. Visitors often report spectral soldiers crouched behind boulders, rifle barrels raised, eyes fixed on some distant enemy. One man documented a figure he followed through the mist, only for it to step through a boulder as if the stone were transparent, leaving no mark on the ground. Then, when he looked at his photographs later, the figure was in a different spot entirely, always staring directly at the camera, as though aware of being observed. The realization hits slowly. These figures are not unaware, and the land itself seems to choreograph their movements, maintaining the terror of the battlefield long after the guns have gone silent. In the dense woods of Chickamauga, where soldiers often became disoriented during battle, visitors report entire sequences of phantom combat. The air carries sudden flashes of gunfire, musket smoke, and distant screams. One historian recorded a group of spectral figures crossing a small clearing, charging as if the enemy were still present, only to vanish behind a ridge in perfect formation. Compasses malfunctioned, cameras froze mid-shot, and audio devices captured the sound of weapons clanging together and orders shouted in clarity that rivaled modern communication. Some witnesses reported not just hearing the dead, but feeling them cold drafts brushing against their skin, heavy pressure on their shoulders, and a subtle, constant feeling of being pushed or guided along paths that made no sense. These are not random occurrences. They repeat consistently across decades, as if the land is compelled to replay the final chaos of battle. Visitors also describe encounters with solitary figures that feel profoundly human and tragic. At Fredericksburg, a young reenactor stumbled upon a figure lying face down in tall grass. He assumed it was another participant until the figure moved impossibly fast, rose into a full silhouette, and looked at him. The uniform was tattered and bloodied, the eyes hollow and yet accusing. The witness froze in terror as the figure slowly vanished into thin air, leaving only the scent of gunpowder and iron behind. Such moments often leave lingering dread, because the encounter is neither violent nor overtly threatening. It is a quiet reminder that someone died here, and they remain in some form, watching, acknowledging the living as witnesses to their suffering. Even the open cornfields echo with horror. Soldiers' figures emerge in the morning fog, silently advancing or falling in combat, repeating the fatal mistakes of history. Cameras left unattended frequently capture anomalies, figures that appear fully formed in one frame, gone in the next, and then partially reappearing elsewhere in the field. Visitors often feel compelled to walk in precise paths, as if being subconsciously guided to avoid disrupting the patterns replaying around them. The effect is disorienting, immersive, and at times emotionally overwhelming, as if the land itself insists on recognition of every death, every scream, and every moment of panic. Medical tents, again, prove to be some of the most active spaces. One paranormal team set up equipment in Shiloh's reconstructed hospital site and captured a series of faint groans, followed by the whisper of a nurse's voice saying, "We did what we could. We failed." The voice had no identifiable source, yet it was unmistakably human. Cameras in the same location repeatedly caught blurry figures bending over makeshift beds, some moving their hands as if performing tasks that modern medicine cannot explain. The haunting feels like a combination of memory and emotional replay of the human effort, failure, and desperation concentrated in the air and soil for over a century. On hillsides like Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge, visitors often report encountering shadow figures that appear to react to human movement. Step forward, and the figures step backward. Pause, and they advance. One man described the unnerving sensation that these figures were measuring him, judging whether he belonged in the field, whether he understood the magnitude of what occurred there. The feeling is accompanied by whispers of commands, faint but precise, like the echoes of a sergeant directing his men one last time. These experiences emphasize a disturbing realization. The haunts are not merely residual, they are interactive in subtle, psychologically profound ways. Some of the most haunting reports involve emotional reactions rather than visual phenomena. People leave these fields crying, shaking, or silently overwhelmed by feelings they cannot place. In certain spots, the emotional residue is so intense that visitors have compared it to standing in the presence of hundreds of invisible observers, all carrying the weight of their final moments. Some hear faint conversations or orders in their heads, repeating commands given over 150 years ago. Others feel sudden pressure on their chests, as if the anguish of the dead is pressing down physically. The land itself becomes a medium through which history, both horrific and intimate, is experienced firsthand. Even today, these battlefields resist being treated as mere historical sites. The stories of ghostly soldiers, wandering shadows, phantom footsteps, and whispering voices continue to accumulate, recorded consistently by independent investigators and ordinary visitors alike. One thing becomes clear to anyone who spends time here. The Civil War did not end in 1865. Its echoes remain in the land, in the trees, and in the faint impressions of the wounded and dying, repeating endlessly for those willing or unfortunate enough to perceive them. The presence is not malevolent in a traditional sense, but neither is it passive. It insists, it projects, and it reminds all who visit that the horrors of war do not vanish simply because time passes. As daylight fades from the Civil War battlefields, something subtle but unmistakable occurs. The land does not simply grow dark, it grows attentive. Rangers who have patrolled these grounds for decades insist that nighttime is when the fields become active, not violently so, but deliberately. The air cools unevenly, pockets of cold settling in precise locations where bodies once fell. At Gettysburg, experienced guides refuse to linger after sunset near the Wheatfield or Devil's Den, claiming the silence there is unnatural, as though sound itself is being absorbed. Visitors who remain too long report hearing distant commands whispered on the wind, not echoes, but fresh, directed speech orders that feel meant for someone standing right where they are. One of the most repeated night encounters involves full-bodied apparitions. At Antietam, a group of amateur historians conducting a night walk described seeing lantern lights moving slowly across the field, bobbing gently as if carried by men searching for wounded soldiers. The lights appeared warm, human, and purposeful. As the group followed, the lanterns abruptly went out, every single one at the same moment. Darkness swallowed the field, and with it came the sound of low moaning, layered voices overlapping as if dozens of injured men were calling out at once. When flashlights were turned on, the field was empty, yet the cries continued for several seconds before fading into silence. Night also brings interaction that feels intentional. At Fredericksburg, a visitor walking alone felt a sudden hand grip his forearm, firm but not aggressive. He spun around, expecting a prank, but found no one behind him. What followed was more disturbing than fear, a wave of grief so intense it forced him to his knees. He later described seeing flashes in his mind: soldiers falling, blood-soaked ground, frantic faces screaming orders he could not understand. The experience ended as abruptly as it began, leaving him physically drained and emotionally shaken. He would later learn that he had been standing exactly where a regiment was surrounded and slaughtered in minutes. Some of the most chilling reports come from battlefield roads used by reenactors and late-night drivers. At Shiloh, motorists have reported seeing wounded soldiers limping across the road, uniforms torn and faces pale, only for their vehicles to pass through empty space. Others claim to have stopped their cars, convinced they had hit someone, only to find no damage, no body, and no footprints, just the overwhelming scent of smoke and iron lingering in the air. Dashcam footage from several incidents revealed faint figures forming briefly in headlights, then dissolving before impact, as if the dead were repeating their final attempts to escape the battlefield. The woods surrounding these sites are especially active after midnight. At Chickamauga, researchers describe the sensation of being surrounded, even when alone. Branches snap rhythmically, mimicking the sound of marching. Leaves rustle in patterns that feel coordinated. One investigator reported hearing his name spoken clearly behind him, spoken by a voice that sounded exhausted, raspy, and pleading. When he turned, he saw a figure leaning against a tree, clutching its side as if wounded. The figure lifted its head, made eye contact, and then slowly faded, leaving behind a cold void where it had stood. The moment felt deeply personal, as if the battlefield itself had chosen to reveal one of its memories. What makes the night encounters more disturbing is their emotional intensity. Unlike daytime sightings, which often feel observational, nighttime experiences feel participatory. People report feeling drawn to specific locations, compelled to stand in certain spots without knowing why. Some describe feeling a sudden rush of panic that is not their own, a fear that feels inherited, ancient, and immediate. Paranormal investigators believe the absence of daylight removes a barrier, allowing emotional imprints to surface more clearly. These are not random hauntings. They are structured, repeating responses triggered by presence, attention, and vulnerability. The climax of many night experiences occurs when visitors realize they are no longer alone in their awareness. At Gettysburg, a night photographer captured a series of images showing shadowed figures forming closer with each shot, as if approaching him deliberately. The final photograph showed a figure standing directly in front of him, face partially illuminated, eyes hollow but alert. The photographer had no memory of taking that final image. He recalled only an overwhelming sensation of being watched, followed by a sudden urge to leave immediately. The camera battery drained completely moments after the final photo was taken. Rangers and historians agree on one unsettling truth. The battlefields are not replaying history for spectacle. They are responding. The dead do not wander aimlessly. They appear where attention is focused, where emotion is strong, where memory is acknowledged. Night amplifies this interaction, blurring the boundary between observer and participant. Those who experience it describe a sense that the land is not showing the past, it is sharing it, forcing the living to feel what was once endured there. By the time visitors leave, many carry something intangible with them. Not fear alone, but a heavy awareness, a sense that the battlefield recognized them as witnesses. The encounters do not end in screams or violence, but in a quiet understanding that some places are alive with memory, and night is when that memory breathes most freely. The Civil War battlefields remain still by day, but by night they continue their vigil silent, watchful and profoundly unwilling to forget. After repeated night encounters across America's Civil War battlefields, investigators began to realize that what lingered there was not silent. It was restrained. The voices did not rush forward or cry out without reason. They waited for attention. When recording devices were introduced, the activity intensified, as though the land recognized an opportunity to finally be heard. Early audio recordings from Gettysburg captured faint murmurs that were initially dismissed as wind, but enhanced playback revealed structured speech-fragmented commands, unfinished sentences, and urgent pleas that ended abruptly, exactly as they would have on a battlefield torn apart by gunfire. As technology improved, the voices grew clearer. At Antietam, an investigative team placed digital recorders near Burnside Bridge just after midnight. When reviewed later, the devices captured layered voices overlapping in confusion, men shouting orders, others screaming for medics, and one voice repeating the word, hold over and over again. None of the team members remembered hearing anything at the time. The sound only existed on playback, suggesting that these voices were not meant for the present moment, but for another time entirely. It was as if the battlefield itself had been interrupted mid-memory and briefly allowed outsiders to hear it. The first undeniable breakthrough came during an investigation at Fredericksburg. A researcher asked a simple question aloud. "Do you know where you are?" After several seconds of silence, a voice answered clearly, calmly, and with chilling certainty. "We're still here." The tone was not angry or frightened. It was resigned. This single response changed how researchers viewed the phenomenon. The spirits were not unaware. They were not confused. They were aware of their surroundings, but bound to them by something deeper than geography. As more questions were asked, responses became disturbingly consistent. Investigators across different states recorded similar phrases. "We didn't leave," "It isn't over," and most unsettling of all, "You're standing in it." These replies suggested that the spirits were not referencing the land, but the moment itself, as though time had collapsed inward, trapping both the dead and the living within the same emotional space. The battlefields were not haunted by individuals alone. They were haunted by events that never truly concluded. The climax of this realization occurred at Shiloh during a controlled overnight experiment. Investigators placed recorders, cameras, and motion sensors throughout the woods, and then withdrew to a single location. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Then, without warning, multiple sensors activated simultaneously. Cameras captured shadows moving against the flow of wind. Audio devices recorded rapid, panicked breathing, dozens of overlapping breaths rising and falling in perfect unison. One investigator described feeling his chest tighten, as though his lungs were no longer entirely his own. At that moment, a voice broke through the noise, sharp and commanding. "Form up." The phrase was a military order, spoken with authority and urgency. What followed was silence absolute, complete silence. No wind, no insects, no ambient sound at all. Investigators later described this moment as the most terrifying, not because something happened, but because it felt as though everything was waiting. Then, slowly, the normal sounds of the night returned. When the team reviewed their footage, they noticed something alarming. Every camera had briefly lost time. Not power, time. Minutes of recording were missing, replaced by static and distorted audio. No technical explanation could account for the loss. From that point on, researchers began to believe that some spirits retained rank and structure, behaving as they did in life. Apparitions seen at night often appeared organized, moving in formation, responding to unseen commands, reacting to presence with disciplined awareness. These were not wandering souls. They were soldiers who never stood down, never received the order to retreat, and never accepted that the war had ended. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery was that the spirits responded differently to different people. Calm observers often experienced subtle activity, while those showing fear or skepticism triggered stronger reactions. Those who spoke respectfully were more likely to capture coherent responses. Those who mocked or challenged the presence experienced equipment failures, emotional distress, or sudden urges to leave. It became clear that the battlefield was not passive. It evaluated intent. As investigators pushed deeper into America's Civil War battlefields, they began to understand that the hauntings did not stop at what could be seen or heard. Beneath their feet lay the true source of unrest, the ground itself. These fields were not carefully planned cemeteries. They were emergency graves, layered with bodies buried quickly, sometimes still clutching weapons, sometimes stacked so tightly that earth barely separated them. Entire regiments vanished into shallow trenches, their identities lost, their deaths unacknowledged. Over time, the land settled, grass grew, and history moved forward, but something underneath never did. Visitors walking across these areas reported sudden heaviness in their legs, sharp pains in their feet, and a strange sensation that the ground resisted their movement, as if stepping forward required permission. The feeling was not physical force, but emotional pressure, an unspoken warning that they were standing somewhere unfinished. At Gettysburg and Antietam, ground-penetrating radar revealed unmarked burial zones far beyond official maps. Paranormal activity surged in these locations. Audio recorders placed near the soil captured low vibrations resembling breathing, slow, rhythmic, synchronized. When enhanced, faint overlapping voices could be heard beneath the sound, repeating fragments of thought rather than speech, as if hundreds of minds were caught in the same moment. Investigators described this not as individual spirits, but as a collective presence memory bound together by shared fear and death. The dead were not alone beneath the soil. They were connected, preserved as units, just as they had stood in life. At Spotsylvania, witnesses repeatedly recorded full formations appearing at dawn, rows of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in the fog, facing forward in absolute silence. They did not wander or react. They waited. When the fog lifted, the figures vanished instantly, leaving behind a suffocating stillness that felt heavier than any sound. The most chilling discovery came during a controlled investigation at Chickamauga, where researchers read aloud the names of fallen soldiers near a mass grave. With each name spoken, audio devices captured faint responses, soft taps, low hums, brief exhales. When the final name was read, a clear whisper emerged from the recorder. All present. The implication was terrifying. Awareness had survived. Identity had survived. The dead were not lost, they were accounted for. It was after these discoveries that something even more disturbing began to occur. In certain areas of these same battlefields, visitors experienced moments where the presence simply dissolved. Sounds disappeared, first wind, birds, distant traffic replaced by cannon fire, shouted commands, boots striking dirt. People found themselves surrounded by wounded soldiers, choking on smoke, smelling blood and gunpowder so vividly it caused nausea. At Gettysburg, a man felt a soldier grab his sleeve and beg for water before vanishing instantly. His jacket was torn where the hand had been. At Antietam, tourists dropped to the ground as musket fire erupted around them, only for the battlefield to snap back into silence seconds later, leaving behind the unmistakable smell of sulfur. The climax of these experiences occurred at Spotsylvania, where an investigator felt the ground vibrate beneath his feet. The vibration grew stronger, matching the rhythm of artillery. His vision blurred, and when it cleared, he stood among soldiers preparing to charge, faces pale, hands shaking, fear visible and raw. An officer walked straight through him, leaving behind a crushing cold that stole his breath. Seconds later, the modern world returned. He collapsed, physically drained, emotionally shattered. What made these experiences undeniable was accuracy. Witnesses described uniforms, formations, and spoken phrases that matched historical records, exactly details they could not have known. In some cases, these time collapses affected groups simultaneously. At Shiloh, multiple visitors heard the same shouted orders, felt the same concussive force of distant explosions, and experienced the same sudden temperature drop. They later described identical sequences of events independently. Researchers concluded that this was not imagination or suggestion. The battlefield was not replaying history, it was projecting it. Time had not been crossed by the living. It had surged forward, overwhelming the present. The realization was horrifying yet clear. The land is not remembering years or dates. It remembers an emotion. Fear, pain, desperation, and duty are imprinted so deeply that under the right conditions, silence, attention, vulnerability, the past resurfaces with force. These battlefields are not haunted by ghosts alone. They are haunted by moments that never fully ended. The war did not conclude everywhere. In these places, it paused, embedded into the soil, waiting to be felt again. Leaving a Civil War battlefield does not always mean escaping it. For many visitors, the experience does not end at the gates or the parking lot. It follows them home quietly, embedding itself into their thoughts, their sleep, and their emotions. In the weeks after visiting these sites, people report vivid dreams of long corridors of trees, endless marching, and voices calling for help in unfamiliar accents. These dreams are often identical across individuals who have never met muddy fields, smoke-filled air, and the overwhelming feeling of needing to move, but not knowing where to go. Psychologists might describe this as trauma projection, but those affected insist the dreams feel intrusive, as if borrowed rather than imagined. Some visitors experience physical aftereffects that defy simple explanation. Sudden exhaustion, chest tightness, and unexplained aches appear days after returning home. A few report coughing fits accompanied by the phantom smell of gunpowder or blood. Medical tests reveal nothing unusual, yet the sensations persist. One visitor to Antietam described waking in the middle of the night, unable to breathe, convinced someone was kneeling on his chest. Another reported bruises forming on his arms, in patterns resembling tight grips. These marks faded quickly, but left a lasting psychological impact, reinforcing the belief that what they encountered was not confined to a place. Behavioral changes are equally common. Individuals who were once calm develop anxiety in open fields or wooded areas. Others become hyper-aware of sound, startled by distant bangs or shouting. Some feel compelled to research specific regiments or battles without knowing why, later discovering connections between their experiences and the exact locations they had stood on during their visit. Investigators refer to this as emotional attachment, a phenomenon where the battlefield seems to mark certain individuals, not maliciously, but deliberately, as if acknowledging them as witnesses. The climax of these aftereffects appears in what researchers call persistent presence. A small number of people report sensing someone near them long after leaving the battlefield. Not seeing, sensing. The feeling of being observed during quiet moments, especially at night. Doors opening slightly. Footsteps in empty rooms. In rare cases, individuals hear whispered phrases that mirror recordings captured on the battlefield itself. One former visitor heard the words, "Hold the line," whispered near his bed, weeks after returning home. He later learned the phrase matched an EVP recorded at the exact site he had visited. These experiences raise a disturbing question. Do some battlefields attach to people who pay too much attention? Paranormal researchers suggest that prolonged emotional engagement, fear, empathy, curiosity may act as an invitation. The battlefield does not follow indiscriminately. It responds to those who connect with it. Not everyone is affected. Some leave untouched. Others carry something back, intangible but persistent, as though they had briefly become part of the memory itself. Perhaps the most unsettling cases involve individuals who feel a sudden, overwhelming urge to return. They describe it not as curiosity, but as obligation. A pull toward the battlefield that grows stronger with time. Some return repeatedly, standing in the same locations, feeling a sense of calm only when they are there. One man visited Gettysburg annually for over a decade, always drawn to the same hill. He claimed it was the only place where his mind felt quiet. When asked why, he replied simply, "It feels like I belong there." He could not explain the statement, but he meant it. By the time one reaches the end of these accounts, a disturbing realization settles in. America's Civil War battlefields are not simply places where history happened. They are places where history continues. The land does not exist as a neutral witness to the past. It is an active container, holding pain, fear, loyalty, and unfinished duty. The soldiers who fell there were not granted closure. Many died believing the fight was not over, that they had failed their comrades, or that they were still needed. That belief did not disappear with death. It embedded itself into the soil, into the trees, into the silence that now blankets these fields. What makes these locations different from ordinary haunted places is intention. The activity does not feel chaotic or attention-seeking. It feels purposeful. The shadows that appear do not wander aimlessly. The voices that answer questions do not cry out randomly. They respond with discipline, memory, and recognition. The battlefields do not lash out at visitors. They measure them. They react to emotion, vulnerability, and respect. Those who enter casually often experience nothing. Those who listen closely, who linger, who emotionally connect, are the ones who feel the weight of the past press back. The final truth becomes impossible to ignore. Not everyone is meant to experience these places in the same way. Some people walk away unchanged. Others carry fragments with them, dreams, sensations, unexplained familiarity. The battlefield does not follow everyone, but it remembers everyone. It catalogs presence, just as soldiers were once counted at roll call. Those who return repeatedly often describe a sense of duty rather than fear, as though they are answering something rather than seeking it. This suggests the most unsettling possibility of all that the battlefields choose their witnesses. Historians may continue to record dates and movements. Psychologists may analyze trauma and imprinting, and skeptics may dismiss these experiences as imagination. But the consistency across locations, witnesses, and generations tells a deeper story. Places shaped by extreme suffering do not simply fade into the past. They become something else. They learn, they observe, they wait. And when conditions are right, they respond. So if this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, listen more carefully, or feel something you couldn't explain, then this is where you belong. Subscribe to this channel for real haunted places, real history, and true stories that don't fade when the video ends. Turn on notifications, because America is full of locations like this, and we're uncovering them one by one. Some places are not meant to be understood. They are meant to be remembered. And once they remember you, they do not forget.